And how involved were you on set and making sure that your vision was still intact?
I wasn't super involved. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to take any credit. I was on set for about 1 to 2 weeks, more as like a spectator. I was just there enjoying everything, and I felt like everyone that had a hand in this movie brought their own talent to it and their own passion, and I didn't want to get in the way of that. I probably maybe would have if I thought it was going in the wrong direction, but I never felt that.
The storm surrounding Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni has done more than just create headlines. It has cast a long, unshakable shadow over author Colleen Hoover and her latest film adaptation, Regretting You. What was meant to be another hit from the Queen of Book Talk has instead become one of the year's biggest disappointments. When Regretting You premiered last week, audiences expected an emotional roller coaster, a heartfelt drama full of redemption and mother-daughter healing. What they got instead was confusion, fatigue, and frustration. On TikTok and across social media, people didn't hold back. Dozens of short reviews appeared within hours of release. "Guys, Colleen Hoover needs to be put in movie jail," one creator said. "Regretting You is not good at all," another added. "At least It Ends With Us had a plot. This had nothing." For every defender online, there were 10 more voices disappointed, frustrated, or just tired. The criticism didn't stop with fans. Critics tore it apart. The reviews described the film as awkwardly written, emotionally flat, and tonally confused. The Hollywood Reporter said bluntly that Regretting You might mark the end of the Colleen Hoover adaptation craze altogether. But what happened? Why did an author whose books sell millions of copies fail to turn that success into another film hit? To understand the fall, we have to look at the rise. Colleen Hoover built an empire through book talk. Her emotional, trauma-filled romances turned her into a household name. Her biggest hit, It Ends With Us, was turned into a feature film starring Blake Lively and directed by Justin Baldoni. That movie carried a $25 million budget, but exploded at the box office, making over $350 million globally. It was a success by Hollywood standards, more than 10 times its cost. But beneath that glittering number was chaos. A public feud between Lively and Baldoni, social media battles, and lawsuits that turned the film's legacy from success story to scandal. Still, Hoover seemed untouchable. Until now, when Regretting You hit theaters, there was little marketing, little buzz, and almost no enthusiasm. Paramount barely pushed the project. On opening weekend, it made just $12.9 million, a devastating result compared to It Ends With Us. It was the same pattern: weak structure, mixed tones, confusing direction. Only this time, Blake Lively wasn't there to blame. Critics have started calling Hoover-style trauma romance a mix of pain, tragedy, humor, and love that doesn't always blend well on screen. Her books weave dark subjects like grief, domestic violence, or betrayal into romantic storylines. But when Hollywood tries to adapt them, the tone becomes messy. One reviewer wrote, "It's hard to tell if we're supposed to cry, laugh, or cringe. The story jumps between heartbreak and Hallmark." And they're right. Regretting You is about a mother and daughter, Morgan and Clara, who lose their husband and father in a tragic car accident only to discover he was having an affair. It's a story full of betrayal, grief, and emotional rebuilding. Yet somehow, it's framed with rom-com style humor, bright music, and awkwardly light dialogue. Viewers didn't know what to feel. Was this supposed to be inspiring or depressing, serious or silly? Hollywood Reporter summed it up. Regretting You splits itself into two barely connected storylines that never meet in the middle. The tragedy is shrugged off just as quickly as it's introduced. The film alternates between Morgan's grief and Clara's teenage romance, two stories that fight for screen time and never merge emotionally. Even critics who praise the actors admitted they look lost. Allison Williams and Dave Franco are both talented, but they seemed unsure how to play their roles. Were they in a drama or a teen rom-com? Neither they nor the audience could tell. The result was a movie that felt unfinished. This isn't new for Colleen Hoover adaptations. It Ends With Us faced the same criticism. Too many tonal shifts, shallow emotional payoff, and over-polished storytelling. Audiences wanted real emotion, but got glossy melodrama. It Ends With Us tried to handle domestic violence, but softened it into romantic banter. Regretting You tried to explore grief, but turned it into something that felt like a high school love story. Hollywood keeps trying to make Hoover's world look pretty, but pain isn't pretty. The problem goes deeper than bad reviews. Hoover herself has become a lightning rod for controversy. After the It Ends With Us success, she distanced herself from Justin Baldoni, even though he had supported and championed her work for years. When Blake Lively sued Baldoni, Hoover publicly sided with Lively, leaving fans shocked. People saw it as betrayal, And when fans asked Hoover to explain, she went silent for 2 months. Her silence created even more resentment. The internet began calling her Hollywood's quiet manipulator, someone who plays both sides depending on who's winning. Now, with Regretting You underperforming, the industry is asking hard questions. Is Colleen Hoover's brand of trauma-filled storytelling fading out? Are audiences tired of her formula? Studios are taking notice. Once seen as a surefire hitmaker, Hoover's name now makes executives nervous. Her books may sell, but her films are starting to lose money, and Hollywood doesn't like losing money. Even insiders admit privately that her involvement on set was far deeper than she claimed. She wasn't just an author giving feedback, she was in the editing room, helping shape scenes and approving changes. When the final product fell flat, she tried to step back and say it wasn't her fault. But people inside the industry know better. When the first weekend numbers for Regretting You dropped, Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit lit up. Clips from the film spread like wildfire, not because they were powerful, but because they were awkward. A scene meant to be heartbreaking became a meme. Another, supposed to be romantic, drew laughter. People stitched together montages mocking the dialogue and tone. This isn't trauma healing, one viral post read. This is trauma acting. Within days, hashtag Regretting You movie trended for all the wrong reasons. Influencers who had once built entire careers on promoting Colleen Hoover's novels started to back away. They called it the end of the Hoover era. It wasn't hate, it was exhaustion. Viewers had seen the same emotional formula too many times, the tearful confessions, the tragic twist, the neat resolution. Colleen Hoover's silence became louder with every passing week. She didn't post, didn't defend, didn't explain. Her team issued a single statement thanking fans for their continued love and support. But that only fueled more questions. Meanwhile, rumors grew that Blake Lively and Hoover had fallen out privately after it ended with us. Some said Hoover had backed Lively in her legal dispute with Baldoni only because of studio pressure. Others said she genuinely believed in Lively's side. Whatever the truth, it made Hoover look complicit in Hollywood drama she had promised to avoid. The woman who once claimed to stay out of celebrity politics was now right in the middle of it. Industry insiders began using a new phrase, the Blake effect. It described how the fallout from Blake Lively's feud had contaminated everything and everyone connected to that project. When Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni clashed publicly, it became one of the most dramatic behind-the-scenes Hollywood battles in years. Lawsuits, leaked emails, social media cryptic posts. It was a storm that blurred the line between art and scandal. Colleen Hoover's name was never on the legal documents, but her reputation was tied to both of them. Her breakout Hollywood moment was their battlefield. Fans began questioning whether she had chosen the wrong people to bring her stories to life, or worse, if she had helped create the chaos by refusing to take control early. The Blake effect wasn't just gossip, it was professional collateral damage. Studios started asking, if we adapt the Hoover book, will the same storm follow us? For years, Hoover's formula was untouchable. Take a painful secret, add a love interest, stir in redemption, and watch readers cry. But film is a harsher mirror than the page. Critics compared her storytelling to emotional fast food quick satisfaction, no substance. They noted that trauma had become a marketing tool. Colleen Hoover doesn't write romance. One essay said, she writes pain that pretends to be love. The statement stung because, in Regretting You, audiences could finally see it. There was love, yes, but also manipulation, repetition, and shallowness. Hollywood had turned her tragedies into spectacles, and audiences had grown numb. By mid-season, analysts of Variety reported that streaming services had quietly canceled 3 Hoover-based development projects. Executives cited market fatigue and audience confusion, but insiders whispered something simpler. People don't trust a brand anymore. When the biggest name in book talk can't guarantee ticket sales, the industry moves on. Hoover's once booming empire fan clubs, film deals, merchandise began to shrink. Her publishers, still loyal, tried to pivot by promoting her newer, lighter romances. But the damage was done. What hurt most wasn't the critics. It was the fans. Readers who had tattooed her quotes, who had cried over to end with us, started to feel used. They accused her of chasing Hollywood fame over honest storytelling. She sold her pain for profit, one reader wrote on TikTok, and forgot why we loved her in the first place. Others defended her, saying no one could survive that level of exposure untouched. They argued that Hoover was a victim of the same system that exploited her story as a machine that turns trauma into entertainment until it stops selling. Both sides had a point. The story of Colleen Hoover's fall is really the story of Hollywood's obsession with emotional spectacle. The studios wanted trauma, but not the truth behind it. They wanted heartbreak, but not the healing. In their quest for marketable pain, they took Colleen Hoover's rawest emotion stories once written in quiet, personal honesty and sanded them down until they gleamed like glass. Her confessions became content. Her grief became glossy. Her heartbreak became a marketing slogan. They polished her painful worlds until they looked like perfume ads, pretty, hollow, and easy to sell. And that's the tragedy. What began as one woman's attempt to translate emotion into art became a system that commodified vulnerability. Inside Hollywood, every emotional movie is part of a machine. There are committees for tone, for color, for pacing. Even tears have to be tested on an audience before they're approved for release. When it ends with us exploded at the box office, the studios thought they found the next great formula. They saw dollar signs in the word trauma. Within weeks, they greenlit adaptations of Reminders of Him, November 9th, and Regretting You. Each one promised the same thing: heartbreak, healing, and hope. But formulas age faster than emotions. By the time Regretting You premiered, the magic had faded. Audiences weren't crying anymore. They were rolling their eyes. Colleen Hoover's stories once felt intimate. Handwritten letters to broken people. Her characters weren't perfect. They made mistakes, loved the wrong people, and faced pain that didn't always resolve neatly. Readers connected with that imperfection. It made them feel seen. But on screen, Hollywood can't risk imperfection. Every scene has to be polished, every line tested, every emotion balanced. The result? Perfection without soul. It's ironic Hoover built her empire by showing the messiness of life, and Hollywood destroyed that very mess in its attempt to commercialize it. They turned emotional truth into emotional performance. Pain became product. When Regretting You flopped, the blame game began instantly. Executives pointed at the script. Producers pointed at the editing. Publicists pointed at the marketing team. And somewhere in that chaos, the heart of the problem got lost. The story had no pulse because the truth had been drained from it. Even insiders quietly admitted that Colleen Hoover's control over the final product had become a double-edged sword. She wanted to protect her vision, but in doing so, she micromanaged it to death. Every rewrite, every reshoot, every emotional moment filtered through 100 notes. By the end, the movie no longer knew what it wanted to be, and neither did the audience. And looming above all this was a Blake effect. The feud between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni didn't just divide fans, it divided an entire industry. Sides were taken, allegiances shifted, rumors spiraled into lawsuits, and those lawsuits turned into headlines that refused to die. Blake accused Baldoni of mishandling creative control and using the project for personal branding. Baldoni accused Blake's team of sabotage and public manipulation. And in the middle of that firestorm stood Colleen Hoover, the writer who had once been the symbol of emotional sincerity, now trapped in a web of Hollywood ego. Every new headline about the feud dragged her name back into controversy. Every rumor about tension on set weakened her credibility as a storyteller. Even though she wasn't on screen, her reputation was performing unwillingly in the most chaotic drama of all, Hollywood politics. So where does Colleen Hoover go from here? Some insiders whisper about her secret project, a self-funded adaptation of Verity. It's said to be darker, riskier, and stripped of Hollywood's influence. No studio control, no PR team hovering over every creative choice. If that rumor is true, it may be her last chance to reclaim her voice. Others claim she's stepping away completely, retreating from the glare and returning to her roots, the solitude of writing, the connection with readers who don't need cameras to feel her words. Because at some point, the spotlight becomes a cage. And for Hoover, the applause that once felt validating now sounds hollow. The most painful truth may be this: audiences have evolved. They no longer want pain packaged as romance. They no longer want to be told that abuse is love or that trauma is destiny. They want honesty. They want depth. They want stories that hurt because they're real, not because they've been rehearsed. The internet has made audiences smarter. They can smell manipulation instantly. They crave authenticity, not repetition. And Hoover, knowingly or not, became the face of a genre that started to feel dishonest. When Regretting You fell apart, it wasn't just her fall, it was the audience reclaiming their power. They were saying, "We don't buy this anymore." As for Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, their feud will fade. Hollywood is built on short memories. Today's controversy is tomorrow's trivia. There will be new headlines, new stars, new scandals. But the scar this feud left behind will linger quietly, invisible but undeniable. It's a reminder that behind every creative difference In every story about fame, there's a line, a thin, glittering boundary between the dream and the downfall, between what the world sees and what it refuses to understand. And somewhere between those two worlds lies Colleen Hoover. To the public, she was the golden author, the woman who cracked the code to modern emotion. Her stories, raw and imperfect, found a voice in millions of readers who felt unseen until they read her words. She wasn't writing literature for critics. She was writing lifelines for people who needed them. But then came the call. Hollywood wanted in. When Blake Lively signed on to star in It Ends With Us, it wasn't just another adaptation. It was a moment Colleen Hoover's quiet world of paper and ink collided with the loud, relentless machinery of Hollywood storytelling, a machine that polishes pain until it sparkles, that edits emotion until it sells. At first, it looked like a dream, a best-selling author, a Hollywood star, a story that already had millions of fans waiting. But behind the scenes, something began to fracture, because what the studio wanted wasn't what Hoover wrote. They didn't want her truth, they wanted her tone. They wanted the feeling of authenticity, not the cost of it. And in that difference between what is lived and what is performed lies the tragedy of the Blake effect. At the center of every creative collision, there's ego. But beneath ego lies something more human. Insecurity, pride, fear of irrelevance. And that's what makes the Blake effect so haunting. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of identities. Two artists from different worlds trying to tell the same story, but speaking entirely different languages. For Colleen, It Ends With Us wasn't fiction. It was therapy on paper. It was her past written in ink. For Hollywood, it was content, another intellectual property ready for packaging, production, and marketing. And somewhere between those two definitions, the soul of the story began to fade. The premiere should have been a victory. Instead, it was a reckoning. Critics called it hollow. Fans called it unrecognizable. And Hoover, the woman whose words once broke hearts, watched her own heartbreak turned into a performance. In interviews, the tone changed. The sparkle dimmed. What began as celebration shifted into silence. And yet, in that silence, something extraordinary began to grow. Because while the industry turned the page, Colleen didn't. She stayed still. She watched the noise burn out, the headlines fade, and the conversations move on to the next scandal, the next adaptation, the next disposable story. And in that stillness, she started to write again, not for studios, not for critics, but for herself. Those close to her say she's writing differently now. Less about romance, more about reality. Less about pain, more about purpose. It's a humbling return to the roots that built her long before fame, long before lawsuits, before the noise. Because maybe Regretting You, her next adaptation, was never meant to succeed. Maybe it was meant to humble an industry that thought it could mass-produce emotion and call it art. When the film flopped, it didn't just reject Colleen Hoover. It rejected its own reflection. Hollywood saw itself, a place where pain is profitable, where trauma is scripted, where authenticity is just another costume worn for award season. It wasn't Hoover who failed. It was the system. A system that forgot why stories matter. Behind the camera lights and PR smiles lies a quiet truth about Hollywood. It doesn't create culture anymore. It recycles it. It studies what went viral last year and builds this year's identity from the ashes of the last trend. Every few years, it finds a new emotion to exploit. First, it was empowerment. Then it was trauma. Now it's authenticity. But true authenticity can't be manufactured. It comes from the cracks, not the camera. It's born in silence, not spotlight. And that's what makes this story more than a Hollywood fallout. It's a warning. Because if pain keeps being packaged for profit, eventually, audiences stop feeling anything at all. Today, there's a quiet rebellion brewing. Not in studios, not on sets, but online. Writers, filmmakers, and artists are finding new ways to share their truths directly, unapologetically, without middlemen. They're not chasing agents or premieres. They're chasing connection. They've seen what happened to Hoover. They've seen how art gets diluted when filtered through corporate algorithms. And they've decided to do it differently. They're the generation that learned the hardest lesson Hollywood refused to. Emotion doesn't need permission to exist. They publish on TikTok, Substack, YouTube, places where imperfection is currency, where vulnerability isn't edited out but celebrated. This isn't just a creative shift. It's a cultural one, a quiet rebellion against the illusion of perfection. Somewhere in Texas, far from Los Angeles, Colleen Hoover sits in front of a blank page again. No casting calls, no executives dissecting every line, no deadlines. Just a woman, a keyboard, and the sound of her own breath, steady, deliberate, alive. Maybe that's where redemption begins. Not on a red carpet, but in solitude. Not in applause, but in the stillness of creation. Because stories don't survive because they trend. They survive because they mean something. And maybe that's what the industry forgot. Hollywood loves to chase the idea of the next big thing. But the truth is, every next big thing starts as something small whisper in someone's heart before it becomes a headline. Colleen Hoover was never trying to be the next anything. She was trying to make sense of her own pain. And when that pain was turned into a performance, the world learned something profound. When emotion becomes currency, empathy becomes extinct. For Blake Lively, the story was different. She walked into a project with all the power of Hollywood behind her. But even power has limits when the source material carries real scars. Blake became the face of a story that no longer belonged to anyone, not the author, not the actress, not the audience. It belonged to machine. The Blake effect wasn't just about stardom. It was about how fame transforms truth into spectacle. How even genuine intention can't survive a system designed to sell suffering. What began as art became an algorithm. And what began as collaboration became competition between truth and performance, vulnerability and visibility. Maybe that's why the Blake effect feels so haunting. Because deep down, it isn't about two women. It's about all of us. We live in a world that rewards the illusion of authenticity more than the real thing. Where vulnerability gets likes. Where tears are thumbnails. Where art becomes a metric. But what happens when the pain stops selling? That's the question echoing now in every studio boardroom. In every writer's mind, in every audience heart that's tired pretending to feel something. The truth is, the film didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was dishonest. Because no amount of budget or branding can disguise a story that's lost its soul. And maybe, just maybe, that's the gift buried inside the failure. Because sometimes failure isn't the end. It's a mirror. And when Hollywood looked into that mirror, it didn't like what it saw. Now, as Colleen Hoover writes again quietly, privately her story has shifted from fame to faith. Faith in the written word. Faith in the quiet readers who still care about truth more than trends. And for those who watch her rise and fall, there's a sense of poetic justice in that. Because maybe it ends with us wasn't the end at all. Maybe it was the beginning of something real, not just for Hoover, but for storytelling itself. The noise of Hollywood fades fast, but honesty that echoes. In the end, the Blake effect isn't about who is right or wrong. It's about what happens when creation meets consumption, when meaning meets marketing. It's about the price of turning truth into content, and the cost isn't counted in money or reviews, it's counted in disconnection. Because somewhere along the way, the industry forgot the simplest rule of storytelling. If you stop listening to the truth stops listening to you. But there's hope. There always is. In the corners of the internet, in the notebooks of unseen writers, in the late-night voices of creators who refuse to perform their pain, the next generation is building something new. They're learning from this. They're writing not for validation, but liberation. Not for the algorithm, but for the soul. And that's how every real revolution begins quietly, truthfully, one story at a time. So maybe when history looks back, the Blake effect won't be remembered as a failure, but as a fraction of the moment the facade began to crack. The moment the industry realized that no amount of polish can replace truth. And as the lights fade and the noise dies, one image remains: a woman in Texas, typing in silence. No cameras, no chaos, just words. Because in the end, that's where everything starts. And maybe that's where everything must return. Because the heart of storytelling isn't spectacle, it's sincerity. And the soul of art isn't fame, it's honesty. So perhaps after all the chaos, that's the legacy of the Blake effect. A reminder that authenticity, no matter how unfashionable, always finds its way back to the light. Fade to black. Whispered narration. Emotion cannot be manufactured. It must be lived.